Right, next we move on to chapter 15, or Al-Hijr. Chapter 15, from verse 1 up to verse 11 thereabouts, it talks about Quran Mubin. It probably is worth it for us to actually talk about Quran Mubin at this point. It says, the ayat says, Alif Lam Ra, still part of the Alif Lam Ra series, Tilka ayatul kitab wa Quranun Mubin. What is Quran Mubin? Well, here we need to analyze that Mubin is not the same as Bayyin. So, you know, when Allah says Sultanun Mubin, this is a clear authority. So the authority is clear. The authority not necessarily clarifies, but it's clear. So in the same way, Quranun Mubin is a clear Quran, a clear reading. So if you go in the world, you will discover that the Ahlul Dhikr, or the cultural Muslims, we read the clear Quran in our hifz, our memorization, in our ritual prayers, and this is what the Quran refers to as Quranun Mubin. The early part of chapter 15 equates Quranun Mubin with Adh-Dhikr, or the orally recited Quran, and this is proof that the basis of the Quran is its orality, not its textuality. It also says that Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafizun. Verily, it is we who sent down a dhikr, so the Quran, the Quran Mubin, and we are guarding it from corruption. So here we can see that the early part of chapter 15 is an augmentation to the point that the Quran is intact and being guarded. From verse 19 onwards, this chapter explains a series of natural metaphors for us to take before we enter into the story of Adam, which begins in verse 26. So when we study Adam here, we have a series of natural metaphors for us to bear in mind. What exactly is God trying to show us with these natural metaphors? For example, it says, Inna wa inna lanahnu nuhyi wa numit wa nahnu al-warithun, and verily it is we who give life and we who cause death, and it is we who are the inheritors. So why is this being stated right there, just before the story of Adam? So that's something for us to think about again. Next, it moves on to the dialogue between Allah and Iblis. So this is almost an echo of chapter 7, which we did a few days ago. And if we make a comparison, perhaps then we can see that here, Iblis's rhetoric, Iblis's reasoning is being expounded. Why is this expounded with regards to the overall theme of this chapter? Well, perhaps here we can see that despite the fact that Quran Mubin is there, the clear Quran is there, there are ways and means for Iblis to circumvent the Quran and to instill un-Quranic ideologies. Then from verse 51 onwards, there are the stories of the guests of Ibrahim. The guests of Ibrahim, they are on their way to bring the wrath of God onto the people of Lut. So here that dialogue is taking place. That dialogue was also repeated in chapter 7 earlier. Again, it's being expounded. So you can see that chapter 7 and chapter 15 have similarities. So perhaps it do us some good to try to see the similarities and differences between the chapters. Next, it mentions people which are not often mentioned. For example, the Ashabul Aikah, who are called the companions of the wood, and Ashabul Hijr, who are called the companions of the rock. And that's the title of this chapter, Al-Hijr. Ashabul Hijr, the companions of the rock. So, to my mind, it's best for us to try to understand the etymologies of these words and try to understand the Quranic implications of these words. then we can perhaps try to understand why these words are being mentioned here as opposed to in chapters like chapter 7 and chapter 26, which has a series of narratives. Next we come to a very interesting closing of the chapter, which takes us back to the Quran. I believe it starts with verse 85, which talks about Allah says, وَمَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, we created not the heavens and the earth, وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا, and whatever's in between, إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ, except with al-haq. So we're still on al-haq here. وَإِنَّ السَّاعَةَ لِآتِيَةٌ, the hour is coming. So فَإِصْفَهِ صَفْحًا جَمِيلًا, so forgive with a gracious or beautiful forgiveness. So this is very beautiful indeed. So we are told that the hour is coming, the time when non-being takes over, and we are told to forgive. So there are obviously forgiveness is a central theme here. And then it continues in verse 87 and says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ سَبْعًا مِنَ الْمَثَانِي وَالْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمِ. Sab'a min al-mathani, if you do a research on the wording, it means an indeterminate number of that which is folded together. So al-mathani refers to parts of the Quran which, if you bring them together as a folding, you will see some interesting elements. For example, in this chapter, we took the earlier part of this chapter, which is Quran Mubin, and we're coming to the last part now, and we folded it together. What do we get? Why is the Quran the opening and the closing of these chapters? Same with Baqarah. Baqarah's beginning was verses 1 till 5, and we compare it with verses 284 to 286, and we get a certain kind of elucidation on the subject. So it contrasts, and it calls this Al-Quran Al-Azim. Azim means something which is strongly founded. The foundations are strong. The word Uzma are bones. So you can see the bones is something which the flesh clothes onto. So this is the foundation of Quranic interpretation. If we can find these pairs and we fold them together, then it talks to the reader here. It says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ. So each reader will find his own set of pairs. And it contrasts this exercise with those who divide, al-muqtasimin, those who divide the chapters. And it calls them الَّذِينَ جَعَلُوا الْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمَ. They have placed the Quran as something ripped into shreds. So this is something we must never do. We must always take the Quran organically as a whole and interpret it as a whole. And then it continues to talk about what we should do, and it ends with فَصَبِّهْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ, work with the praise of your Lord, and be those who are in prostration, مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ, and وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ, serve your Lord, حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ, until comes to you al-yaqeen, which is really the period of death. That's when you see everything. So here we can see that the Quran uses chapter 15 to put itself forward, Al-Quran Mubin, the clear Quran, and tells you about its preservation. It then tells you a few stories and natural metaphors, and then it ends with the Quran itself being expounded in terms of its methodology of reading. What are we supposed to do with this? Well, the end of the chapter tells us, فَصَبِّهْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَكُنْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. Work with the praise of your Lord and be of those who prostrate. وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ, and serve your Lord until comes to you al-yaqeen, the certainty. So this is what we're meant to do with our reading of the Quran. Indeed, there are other chapters which centralize the Quran like this. Perhaps chapter 17 is one of them. We'll come to chapter 17 tomorrow, inshallah. But anyway, this closes the study of the Alif Lam Ra chapters in Ramadan 2011. I hope you've benefited from my rather disorganized exposition. And again, please leave comments. I appreciate your comments. And you know, if you don't get exactly why we're doing this, also please leave a comment. Tell us why, so I can perhaps explain it in future presentations. Many thanks for your viewership. Bye.